When 250 Marines were abandoned deep in hostile territory with no backup coming, military command had written them off as acceptable losses. But they didn't count on Harley Lee, a 23-year-old sniper from Wales who had been overlooked and underestimated her entire military career. What happened next would shatter every assumption about what one determined soldier could accomplish when everything seemed impossible. This is the story of how a woman they considered too emotional for combat operations broke every rule in the book and pulled off the most audacious rescue mission in modern military history. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out. Subscribe now for more. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Sentinel as Harley Lee adjusted her scope for the third time in 10 minutes. At 23, she possessed the steady hands of a surgeon and the patience of a saint, qualities that made her one of the finest marksmen on the base. But those same qualities were consistently dismissed by her superiors as signs of overthinking and hesitation. Harley stood barely 5'4", with auburn hair pulled back in regulation style, her Welsh accent still noticeable despite 3 years of service. She carried herself with quiet confidence, but her commanders saw something different. They saw a young woman who asked too many questions, who wanted to understand the why behind every order, who showed emotion when discussing mission parameters. In their minds, these traits made her unsuitable for the high-stakes operations that defined special reconnaissance units. The irony wasn't lost on Harley that she could put a bullet through a target at 800 meters in crosswinds that would challenge veteran snipers, yet she was relegated to perimeter security and training exercises. While her male counterparts were selected for forward reconnaissance missions, she spent her days teaching marksmanship to new recruits and maintaining equipment that others would use in the field. Her weapon of choice was a modified precision rifle that she had personally calibrated over months of practice. Every adjustment, every modification had been tested and retested until the weapon was as much an extension of her body as her own hands. But her expertise was seen as obsession, her dedication labeled as inability to work with standard equipment. The base psychology officer, Dr. Reynolds, had noted in her file that Harley displayed excessive emotional investment in mission outcomes and concerning levels of preparation that suggest anxiety-driven behavior. These observations, meant to be clinical assessments, had become the foundation for every decision about her career trajectory. What her superiors failed to understand was that Harley's emotional investment wasn't a weakness. It was the driving force behind her extraordinary competence. When she studied satellite imagery late into the night, she wasn't being obsessive. She was memorizing terrain that might one day mean the difference between life and death for her fellow Marines. When she asked detailed questions about enemy movement patterns, she wasn't showing hesitation. She was gathering intelligence that could save lives. The training facility where Harley spent most of her time became her sanctuary. Here, surrounded by targets and ballistic charts, she could demonstrate her capabilities without the interference of preconceived notions about her gender or temperament. Her accuracy scores were consistently in the top percentile. Her knowledge of ballistics and environmental factors exceeded that of instructors with twice her experience, and her ability to adapt to changing conditions was remarkable. But numbers on a scorecard couldn't overcome the fundamental bias that viewed her emotional depth as a liability rather than an asset. In briefings, when she expressed concern about civilian casualties or questioned the intelligence behind target selections, her comments were noted as evidence of her unsuitability for combat operations. Her empathy, which made her a more thoughtful and precise operator, was seen as proof that she lacked the emotional detachment necessary for war. The other Marines respected her skills but maintained a careful distance, not out of personal dislike, but because associating too closely with someone deemed not quite right for combat could affect their own career prospects. Harley understood this calculation and didn't blame them for it. But the isolation deepened her sense of being fundamentally misunderstood by the institutions she served. Her living quarters reflected her methodical nature. Maps covered one wall, marked with colored pins indicating various tactical scenarios she had studied. A bookshelf held manuals on advanced marksmanship techniques, military history, and psychological studies on performance under stress. Her personal journal, written in a mixture of English and Welsh, contained detailed analyses of every training exercise, every missed opportunity, every moment when she felt her potential being wasted. The pattern became clear during the monthly assignment briefings. Harley would sit in the back row of the command tent, notebook ready, hoping this time would be different. Each month brought new operations, new opportunities for experienced personnel to prove themselves in the field. And each month, her name was conspicuously absent from the deployment lists. Operation Desert Falcon required a precision marksman for overwatch during a high-value target extraction. Harley's scores qualified her above several of the selected candidates, but Lieutenant Colonel Brooks chose Sergeant Mills instead. "Mills has the emotional stability we need for this kind of pressure," Brooks explained to his staff after the briefing. The fact that Mills had scored 15 points lower on his last marksmanship evaluation seemed irrelevant. Operation Mountain Echo needed someone who could navigate complex terrain and provide accurate intelligence on enemy positions. Harley had spent months studying the target region, could identify every ridge and valley from memory, and had developed innovative techniques for long-range observation in mountainous conditions. The assignment went to Corporal Davies, whose primary qualification was that he didn't overthink the mission parameters. The justifications always followed the same pattern. Her superior technical skills were acknowledged, but then dismissed in favor of vague concerns about temperament, emotional stability, or cultural fit. The men who received these assignments weren't necessarily less capable, but they possessed the crucial advantage of fitting the expected profile of a combat operator. Captain Foster, her immediate supervisor, had pulled her aside after one particularly disappointing briefing. "Lee, you're technically proficient, no one disputes that, but special operations requires a specific mindset. We need people who can compartmentalize, who don't get emotionally invested in outcomes. Your psychological profile suggests you might struggle with that kind of detachment." The conversation had been framed as constructive feedback, but Harley understood it as a career death sentence. Her ability to care deeply about mission success and the welfare of her fellow Marines was being reframed as a disqualifying weakness. The very qualities that made her a more thoughtful and effective soldier were the reasons she would never be trusted with important assignments. Training exercises revealed the same bias in smaller ways. When Harley suggested alternative approaches or pointed out potential problems with planned operations, her input was politely noted and quietly ignored. Her detailed preparation was seen as evidence of anxiety rather than professionalism. Her questions about mission parameters were interpreted as lack of confidence rather than due diligence. The most frustrating incidents occurred during joint training with other units. Visiting commanders, unaware of her reputation, would often be impressed by her performance and express interest in having her join their operations. These conversations would invariably end after private discussions with base leadership, leaving Harley to wonder what specific concerns were being shared about her capabilities. Her personnel file, which she had managed to review during a routine administrative task, contained evaluations that painted a picture of competence undermined by emotional instability. Exceptional technical skills, but may lack the psychological resilience for high-stress operations. Outstanding marksmanship ability, though concerns remained about decision-making under pressure. Highly knowledgeable, but tends toward overthinking and emotional investment in outcomes. The cumulative effect of these assessments created a professional reputation that preceded her into every interaction. New officers arrived at the base already aware that Harley Lee was technically skilled, but somehow unsuitable for real missions. The bias became self-reinforcing as each denied opportunity was cited as evidence that she wasn't ready for greater responsibilities. Harley began to understand that excelling within the current system wouldn't be enough to change perceptions. Her superiors had invested too much in their assessment of her limitations to easily admit they might be wrong. She needed to find ways to demonstrate her capabilities outside the formal structure that had already categorized her as insufficient. This realization led her to begin preparing for opportunities that didn't yet exist, developing skills and knowledge that went beyond her assigned duties. If the system wouldn't give her chances to prove herself, she would create her own opportunities when the moment arose. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. While her colleagues spent their off-duty hours relaxing or socializing, Harley dedicated herself to developing capabilities that no training manual required. Her small quarters became a private war college where she studied every aspect of modern warfare that might prove relevant to future missions. The communications equipment she had quietly acquired through legitimate channels allowed her to monitor multiple radio frequencies simultaneously. She learned the call signs, communication protocols, and operational patterns of units throughout the region. This wasn't authorized intelligence gathering, but rather a personal project to understand how different military elements coordinated during complex operations. Her language skills extended far beyond the basic phrases taught in military training. Harley had achieved conversational fluency in 4 regional dialects, spending hours each week practicing with native speakers she had befriended in nearby villages during approved leave periods. These relationships, developed through genuine cultural interest and mutual respect, provided insights into local terrain and political dynamics that formal intelligence reports often missed. Physical conditioning became an obsession that went beyond standard military fitness requirements. Harley designed training routines that combined endurance, strength, and mental resilience. She could run 15 miles in mountainous terrain while carrying a full combat load, maintain shooting accuracy after hours of physical stress, and function effectively on minimal sleep for extended periods. These capabilities were developed through personal discipline, not official training programs. Her technical knowledge expanded through independent study of advanced ballistics, weather analysis, and tactical communications. She subscribed to professional journals, attended online courses during personal time, and corresponded with experts in various fields. This self-directed education gave her expertise that exceeded many officers with years more experience. The mapping project in her quarters represented months of meticulous work. Using satellite imagery, topographical surveys, and information gathered from conversations with local contacts, Harley had created detailed tactical maps covering hundreds of square miles surrounding the base. These maps included information about water sources, concealed routes, observation points, and potential shelter locations that standard military maps didn't provide. Medical training became another area of intensive preparation. Beyond the basic first aid required of all personnel, Harley had completed advanced courses in battlefield medicine, trauma surgery, and psychological support techniques. She practiced these skills regularly, understanding that any future mission might require her to provide medical assistance under extreme conditions. Her weapon maintenance and modification skills had evolved into genuine expertise. Harley could completely disassemble and rebuild her rifle blindfolded, had learned to manufacture custom ammunition for specific conditions, and had developed techniques for maintaining equipment effectiveness in harsh environments. Her rifle had become a precision instrument calibrated to her exact specifications. Navigation abilities extended beyond standard GPS and compass techniques to include celestial navigation, dead reckoning in zero visibility conditions, and the ability to determine position using environmental cues. She had practiced these skills during weekend exercises in challenging terrain, often returning with valuable intelligence about areas that hadn't been properly surveyed. The psychological preparation was perhaps most important. She had studied stress management techniques, meditation practices, and mental resilience training. She had developed methods for maintaining focus and decision-making capability under extreme pressure. This preparation included visualization exercises where she mentally rehearsed various crisis scenarios and her responses to them. Most significantly, she had created detailed contingency plans for situations that military doctrine considered unlikely or impossible. These plans addressed scenarios where normal command structures failed, where standard procedures proved inadequate, or where individual initiative might be required to prevent catastrophic outcomes. She had never shared these plans with superiors, knowing they would be dismissed as evidence of her tendency toward overthinking. The breaking point came during an evaluation exercise designed to assess personnel readiness for advanced combat roles. Harley had prepared extensively, seeing this as her opportunity to finally demonstrate capabilities that had been overlooked for too long. The exercise would test marksmanship, tactical thinking, physical endurance, and decision-making under pressure. Her performance exceeded expectations in every measurable category. Harley achieved perfect scores on marksmanship tests under various conditions, completed physical challenges faster than most male participants, and demonstrated tactical knowledge that impressed even veteran instructors. Her solutions to complex scenarios showed creativity and thorough understanding of military doctrine combined with practical innovation. The debriefing session that followed would haunt her for months. Major Richardson, the evaluation officer, sat across from her with an expression that mixed professional disappointment with personal concern. Her test scores were spread across his desk like evidence in a court-martial, each perfect mark seeming to argue against the conclusion he had already reached. "Lee, your technical performance was outstanding," Richardson began, his tone suggesting this was somehow problematic. "But technical proficiency isn't everything. Your approach to the scenarios showed a concerning level of emotional investment. You seemed personally affected by simulated casualties, spent too much time considering civilian impact, and appeared to struggle with the psychological demands of command decisions." Harley had indeed been affected by the realistic training scenarios. When faced with simulated situations involving injured personnel or civilian endangerment, she had responded with the urgency and care that real situations would demand. Her solutions prioritized minimizing casualties and achieving mission objectives through methods that preserved human life whenever possible. "Furthermore," Richardson continued, consulting his notes, "your preparation for this evaluation was excessive. You demonstrated knowledge and capabilities that extend far beyond your assigned duties. This suggests either an inability to focus appropriately or concerning ambitions that might interfere with unit cohesion." The months of study, the extra training, the careful preparation that had made her performance possible were being reframed as character defects. Her dedication was evidence of instability, her competence proof of inappropriate priorities. The psychological profile that emerged from the evaluation painted a picture of someone too emotionally invested in outcomes to be trusted with real responsibilities. Dr. Reynolds, the base psychologist, had submitted an addendum to her evaluation that effectively ended any possibility of advancement. Subject displays hypervigilance regarding mission parameters and outcomes. Her preparation patterns suggest anxiety-driven behavior that could compromise decision-making under actual combat stress. Recommend continued assignment to non-critical duties pending further psychological evaluation. The recommendation was accepted without question. Despite performance that objectively qualified her for advanced assignments, Harley was relegated to even more limited duties. Her weapon was replaced with standard equipment. Her access to advanced training materials was restricted, and her input during briefings was politely but firmly discouraged. The isolation became nearly complete when word of her evaluation spread through the base. Fellow Marines who had respected her abilities began to distance themselves, concerned that association with someone deemed psychologically questionable might affect their own career prospects. The few who remained supportive could only express their disagreement privately, understanding that challenging the evaluation publicly would be career suicide. Her immediate supervisor, Sergeant Williams, delivered the final blow during a private conversation meant to be supportive. Lee, you need to understand that the military values consistency and predictability. Your level of preparation and emotional investment make people uncomfortable. They don't know what to expect from you, and that uncertainty is seen as a liability. Harley realized that excellence within the current system had become impossible. Her strengths were being systematically redefined as weaknesses, her capabilities dismissed as evidence of psychological instability. The institution she served had decided that her way of being a soldier was fundamentally incompatible with their vision of military effectiveness. The emergency klaxon shattered the routine quiet of Forward Operating Base Sentinel at 13:47 hours on what had been a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Harley was in the armory conducting inventory when the piercing alarm sent every Marine on base into immediate action stations. She dropped her clipboard and ran toward the command center, her heart already racing with anticipation of whatever crisis had triggered the highest alert level. The command center erupted in controlled chaos as officers and communication specialists worked frantically to piece together fragmentary reports from the field. Radio traffic was chaotic, filled with overlapping transmissions, static interference, and the unmistakable sounds of combat in the background. Through the cacophony, Harley caught fragments that made her blood run cold. "Bravo Company! Heavy contact! Requesting immediate... Coordinates follow!" The transmission cut to static. All call signs! Enemy forces, larger than estimated. Need extraction! Artillery incoming!" Major Richardson stood at the center of the control room, his face grim as situation reports continued to paint an increasingly desperate picture. The large tactical display showed the positions of Bravo Company, 250 Marines who had been conducting a routine patrol in what intelligence had assessed as a relatively secure sector. What should have been a straightforward reconnaissance mission had become a nightmare. Intelligence reports had completely failed to identify a major enemy concentration in the area. Bravo Company had walked into a carefully prepared ambush that left them surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off from any possibility of conventional rescue. The radio chatter grew more desperate as the situation developed. "Command, this is Bravo 6. We are completely surrounded. Estimate enemy forces at battalion strength. Repeat, we need immediate extraction or we will be overrun." "Bravo 6, this is Command. Extraction assets are not available. Enemy air defense too heavy. Cannot risk additional personnel." The silence that followed that transmission was deafening. Harley stood at the edge of the command center, watching the faces of officers as they processed what had just been communicated. 250 Marines had been effectively written off as acceptable losses because conventional rescue methods were deemed too risky. Colonel Hayes, the base commander, arrived and immediately began coordinating with higher command. The conversations that followed were conducted in hushed tones, but their content was clear to anyone with military experience. Resources were not available for a rescue mission that would likely result in additional casualties. The cost-benefit analysis was simple and brutal. Losing additional personnel in a failed rescue attempt was worse than losing the Marines already trapped. "Sir," Major Richardson reported to Hayes, "intelligence confirms enemy strength at approximately 800 personnel with heavy weapons and anti-aircraft capabilities. Any conventional rescue attempt would require resources we don't have available and would likely result in significant additional casualties." Hayes nodded grimly. "Understood. Continue monitoring the situation and provide whatever support we can through artillery and airstrikes when possible, but we cannot commit ground forces or aircraft to a rescue mission under these conditions." The tactical display showed Bravo Company's position as a small cluster of blue dots surrounded by an expanding sea of enemy indicators. With each passing hour, their situation would become more hopeless. They had sufficient ammunition and supplies for perhaps 12 hours of sustained combat, after which they would be completely at the mercy of overwhelming enemy forces. Harley studied the terrain displayed on the command center's main screen, her mind automatically calculating distances, sight lines, and potential approaches. The area was mountainous and complex, with multiple ridges and valleys that could provide concealment for movement. More importantly, she recognized the region from her months of independent study and map-making. The enemy forces were concentrated in the valleys, taking advantage of superior numbers and heavy weapons. But the ridgeline approaches they were ignoring offered possibilities that conventional military thinking would dismiss as impossible. The terrain was too difficult, the distances too great, the risks too high for standard military operations. But Harley had spent months studying exactly this type of impossible scenario. Her detailed maps included routes through that mountainous region that weren't visible on standard military charts. Her physical conditioning and specialized equipment could handle terrain that would defeat conventional forces. Most importantly, her marksmanship skills could be decisive in a situation where precision fire from unexpected positions might shift the tactical balance. As she listened to the increasingly desperate radio transmissions from Bravo Company, Harley realized that 250 Marines were about to die because no one believed rescue was possible. But she knew something that the officers in the command center didn't. Sometimes impossible just meant that no one had been prepared for the right kind of possible. The next 4 hours revealed the complete inadequacy of standard military responses to Bravo Company's desperate situation. Every conventional option was systematically explored and rejected as command struggled to find a solution that wouldn't result in catastrophic additional losses. The first attempt involved precision artillery strikes designed to create an escape corridor for the trapped Marines. Fire control specialists worked frantically to calculate targeting solutions that would suppress enemy forces without endangering friendly personnel. The strikes began at 1600 hours, massive explosions echoing across the mountainous terrain as high-explosive rounds impacted enemy positions. The artillery barrage achieved temporary suppression of enemy fire, but the effect was limited and short-lived. Enemy forces simply withdrew to protected positions during the bombardment, then reoccupied their strategic locations once the firing ceased. The terrain provided too many natural defensive positions for artillery alone to create a meaningful escape route. "Command, this is Bravo 6, came the strained voice of the company commander. "Artillery impact, minimal effect. Enemy forces regrouping, still completely surrounded. Ammunition down to 30%. Air support attempts proved equally futile. 2 attack helicopters attempted to approach the area but were driven back by intensive ground fire from enemy anti-aircraft positions. The mountainous terrain channeled aircraft into predictable approach routes that enemy forces had obviously prepared for. After one helicopter sustained significant damage from a surface-to-air missile, all air operations in the area were suspended. Colonel Hayes coordinated with Regional Command to explore options for reinforcement or relief operations. The conversation was conducted on secure channels, but the outcome was visible on the faces of everyone in the command center. Higher command had made their assessment. The resources required for a successful rescue operation were not available, and the risk of additional casualties was unacceptable. "Sir," Major Richardson reported after completing coordination calls, "Division confirms that no additional ground forces can be committed to rescue operations. The nearest available units are 8 hours away, and enemy strength in the area makes a conventional approach impossible without significant air support that we cannot provide." Special operations units were considered and quickly dismissed. The terrain and enemy concentration made insertion impossible, and the time required to plan and execute a special operations mission exceeded the time Bravo Company had remaining. Even if such a mission were attempted, it would likely result in additional casualties without significantly improving the situation. The most heartbreaking moment came when communication specialists established temporary contact with individual squad leaders within Bravo Company. The Marines on the ground understood their situation clearly and were requesting permission to attempt breakout operations that everyone knew would be suicidal. Command, this is Bravo 3-6. We can attempt to punch through enemy lines in Sector 7. Estimate 50% casualties, but some personnel might reach friendly positions. Negative, Bravo 3-6. Maintain defensive positions. Continue to conserve ammunition. The order to maintain position was essentially an order to wait for death. Enemy forces were systematically tightening the circle around Bravo Company's position, bringing up heavy weapons and additional personnel. Intelligence reports indicated that final assault preparations were underway, with the attack expected to begin at dawn. Medical evacuation was impossible due to the same factors that prevented rescue operations. Several Marines within the perimeter had sustained serious injuries that required immediate medical attention, but no helicopter could reach them through the intensive anti-aircraft fire. The medics were doing what they could with limited supplies, but several injured personnel would not survive until morning without proper medical care. Communication with the trapped unit became increasingly sporadic as enemy jamming efforts intensified. By 2000 hours, only intermittent contact was possible, and even that was heavily corrupted by electronic interference. The Marines of Bravo Company were disappearing into a communications blackout that would make coordination of any rescue attempt nearly impossible. The final conventional option explored was negotiation. Intelligence personnel attempted to establish contact with enemy commanders to discuss possible terms for the release of captured personnel. These efforts were met with silence, making it clear that enemy forces intended to eliminate Bravo Company entirely, rather than risk the complications of managing prisoners. As night fell, the tactical situation had become hopeless by every conventional measure. 250 Marines were trapped in a rapidly contracting perimeter surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces, with no possibility of rescue using available resources and standard military procedures. The command center had exhausted every option that military doctrine provided. Colonel Hayes stood before the assembled staff and delivered the assessment that everyone already understood. We have done everything within our capabilities to support Bravo Company. The situation exceeds our ability to respond with available resources. We will continue monitoring and provide what support we can, but we must accept that some situations cannot be resolved through conventional means. The unspoken reality hung heavy in the room. They were watching 250 fellow Marines die because military doctrine had no answer for their impossible situation. In 12 hours, the command center would be documenting casualties and writing reports about lessons learned, while families back home would be receiving notification that their loved ones had died in an operation that was supposed to be routine. Harley stood at the edge of the command center, studying the tactical display with an intensity that made nearby officers uncomfortable. While others saw an impossible situation, she recognized patterns and possibilities that months of independent preparation had trained her to identify. The terrain that was defeating conventional military solutions was exactly the type of environment she had spent countless hours studying and preparing for. The enemy's defensive positions followed predictable patterns, concentrating forces in valleys and approaches that standard military doctrine would use for rescue operations. But Harley's detailed mapping had identified ridgeline routes that avoided these choke points entirely. Her hand-drawn charts, locked away in her quarters, showed paths through the mountains that weren't visible on standard military maps. More importantly, she understood that the enemy's strength was also their weakness. Their large numbers required coordination and communication that could be disrupted by precision fire from unexpected positions.
The mountainous terrain that prevented helicopter operations also provided concealment for a single operator who knew the routes and had the skills to navigate them alone. Her analysis of the situation was methodical and comprehensive. Enemy forces totaled approximately 800 personnel, but they were spread across multiple positions to maintain the encirclement. This distribution meant that any single position was defended by no more than 50 soldiers, a number that could be neutralized by accurate sniper fire from concealed positions. The communications equipment she had quietly acquired allowed her to monitor enemy radio traffic, revealing coordination patterns and command structures that formal intelligence hadn't identified. She could hear the enemy commanders coordinating their final assault plans scheduled to begin at dawn. But she also detected vulnerabilities in their communication protocols that could be exploited. Weather conditions were optimal for long-range precision shooting. Clear skies, minimal wind, and excellent visibility would allow her to engage targets at distances that exceeded enemy expectations. Her customized rifle and hand-loaded ammunition could achieve accuracy at ranges where return fire would be ineffective. The time factor was critical, but manageable. Bravo Company had approximately 10 hours before the final assault began. Using her knowledge of mountain routes, Harley calculated that she could reach optimal firing positions within 6 hours, providing 4 hours of operational time to disrupt enemy positions and create an escape corridor. Most significantly, she had identified a communication relay point that enemy forces were using to coordinate their operations. Eliminating this position would create confusion and delay their assault, buying additional time for Bravo Company and potentially causing enemy forces to withdraw rather than risk extended operations without reliable communication. Her plan was audacious but technically feasible. Using concealed approaches that avoided enemy observation, she could establish multiple firing positions around the perimeter. By systematically eliminating key personnel and equipment, she could create enough disruption to allow Bravo Company to break out toward friendly territory. The ecological aspect was equally important. Enemy forces expected conventional rescue attempts using vehicles and aircraft. A single sniper operating from unexpected positions would create uncertainty and fear that could multiply the tactical impact of each shot. Military history provided examples of small units achieving disproportionate effects through surprise and superior positioning. Harley's knowledge of enemy tactics, gained through months of study in captured documents and intelligence reports, told her that this particular enemy force relied heavily on centralized command and control. Disrupting their leadership structure would create cascading effects throughout their operation. The medical situation within Bravo Company added urgency, but also opportunity. Several wounded Marines required immediate evacuation, but their condition also meant that enemy forces might not expect aggressive breakout attempts. This assumption could be leveraged to achieve tactical surprise. Her language skills would allow her to monitor enemy communications in real time, providing immediate intelligence about their responses to her actions. This capability would allow her to adapt her tactics dynamically as the situation developed. The equipment she needed was available and ready. Her rifle was zeroed for the expected engagement distances, her ammunition was precisely matched to the weapon and conditions, and her navigation and communication gear was tested and reliable. Months of preparation had ensured that she possessed everything necessary for the mission. Standing in the command center, watching officers struggle with an impossible situation, Harley realized that she was the only person on the base who had both the capability and the detailed knowledge necessary to attempt a rescue. Her unconventional preparation, dismissed by superiors as evidence of psychological problems, had created exactly the skill set required for this unprecedented crisis. The plan crystallized in her mind with startling clarity. While military doctrine offered no solutions, her months of independent study and preparation had equipped her for precisely this type of impossible mission. 250 Marines would die unless someone was willing to attempt what conventional wisdom deemed impossible. Harley looked around the command center one final time. knowing that what she was contemplating would end her military career regardless of outcome. But career considerations seemed insignificant compared to the lives hanging in the balance. Sometimes being a good soldier meant ignoring orders from people who couldn't see solutions that existed outside their experience.
Harley stepped forward from her position at the edge of the command center, her voice cutting through the quiet desperation that had settled over the assembled officers. "Sir, I believe there's a viable approach to reach Bravo Company." The conversation stopped abruptly as every eye turned toward her. Major Richardson's expression shifted from professional focus to visible irritation. "Lee, this is not the time for theoretical discussions. We need practical solutions, not academic exercises." But Harley pressed forward, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Sir, I've studied the terrain in that sector extensively. There are ridgeline approaches that bypass enemy positions entirely. A single operator with appropriate skills could reach observation positions that would allow precise fire support and communication with Bravo Company." Colonel Hayes looked up from the tactical display, his expression suggesting he was humoring a child rather than considering a legitimate proposal. "Lee, we've analyzed every possible approach. The terrain is impassable for military operations. Enemy forces control all viable routes, and any attempt to insert personnel would result in additional casualties without improving the situation." "Sir, with respect, I believe those assessments are based on conventional approaches. The routes I'm referring to aren't visible on standard military maps. I've documented approaches that could work for a single operator with specialized equipment and training." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Reynolds, the base psychologist, had entered the command center during the crisis and now stepped forward with obvious concern. "Colonel, I think it's important to note that Lee has exhibited patterns of hypervigilance and inappropriate preparation for scenarios outside her assigned duties. Her current suggestion appears consistent with psychological profiles indicating difficulty accepting limitations." Major Richardson nodded, as if the psychologist's comment confirmed his own assessment. "Lee, your dedication is noted, but this situation requires realistic solutions, not wishful thinking. The enemy's strength in that area would overwhelm any single operator within minutes of detection." Harley felt the familiar frustration of having her capabilities dismissed without consideration, but the stakes made her persistent. "Sir, I have detailed intelligence on enemy positions, communication protocols, and tactical patterns. The terrain provides concealment that would allow engagement from positions they're not defending. I have the marksmanship skills and equipment necessary to disrupt their operations." "You have marksmanship skills suited for training exercises and controlled environments," Richardson replied sharply. "Combat operations against a determined enemy require capabilities and temperament that extend far beyond target practice. Your psychological evaluation specifically noted concerns about your ability to function under genuine combat stress." Colonel Hayes intervened, his tone carrying the authority of final decision. "Lee, your concern for Bravo Company is commendable, but your proposed solution is based on overconfidence in abilities that haven't been tested under real combat conditions. The risk of losing additional personnel in a failed rescue attempt is unacceptable." "Sir, what's unacceptable is watching 250 Marines die when there's a viable option to help them." Harley raised her voice slightly before she controlled herself. The emotional undertone in her response seemed to confirm every concern that had been raised about her psychological fitness. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward again. "Colonel, this reaction demonstrates exactly the kind of emotional investment that makes Lee unsuitable for high-stress operations. Her inability to accept command decisions rationally is precisely what we've been concerned about." Furthermore, Major Richardson added, Lee's insistence that she possesses unique capabilities that trained special operations personnel lack demonstrates the kind of unrealistic self-assessment that could prove fatal in actual combat situations. Harley realized that every argument she made was being reframed as evidence of the psychological problems that had already been documented in her file. Her detailed preparation was proof of obsession, her confidence evidence of dangerous overestimation, her emotional concern for Bravo Company confirmation of her unfitness for combat operations. Sir, I tried one final time. I'm not asking for approval based on theoretical capabilities. I have documented intelligence, detailed maps, and proven marksmanship skills. The plan I'm proposing is technically feasible and represents the only option that doesn't require resources we don't have. Colonel Hayes's response was final and unambiguous. Lee, you are not qualified for special operations. You are not trained for independent combat missions, and you are not authorized to participate in rescue operations. Your suggestions have been noted, but this discussion is closed. Return to your assigned duties and allow qualified personnel to handle this situation. The dismissal was complete and public. Every officer in the command center had witnessed her proposal being rejected not on tactical grounds, but on the basis of psychological assessments that deemed her fundamentally unsuitable for the kind of operation she was proposing. As she turned to leave, Harley heard Major Richardson speaking quietly to Colonel Hayes. Sir, I recommend we document this incident. Lee's behavior during a crisis situation confirms our concerns about her judgment and emotional stability. She clearly believes she possesses capabilities that far exceed her actual qualifications. Walking out of the command center, Harley understood that her military career was effectively over, regardless of what happened next. Her superiors had invested too much in their assessment of her limitations to ever acknowledge that she might possess the capabilities necessary to save Bravo Company. But as she heard the latest radio transmission from the trapped Marines, reporting increasing enemy activity and dwindling ammunition, she also understood that career considerations were meaningless compared to lives that could still be saved.
Harley returned to her quarters, with the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on her shoulders. 250 Marines would die in less than 8 hours unless someone acted, and she was the only person on the base with both the capability and the knowledge necessary to help them. The fact that her superiors had dismissed her proposal didn't change the tactical realities of the situation. She sat on her narrow bunk and looked around the small room that had been her sanctuary for months. The maps covering the walls, the communication equipment carefully maintained and upgraded, the specialized gear acquired through careful planning. Everything she needed for the mission was here, ready and waiting for an opportunity that had finally arrived. The letter she wrote to her parents in Wales was brief and honest. She explained that she was about to undertake an action that would save lives but end her military career. She didn't apologize for her decision, but rather tried to help them understand that some choices transcended personal consequences. The letter joined similar messages to her sister and closest friends, sealed and placed where they would be found regardless of her mission's outcome. Her gear selection was methodical and based on months of preparation for exactly this scenario. The modified rifle that had become an extension of her own capabilities was carefully disassembled and packed for transport. Custom ammunition, zeroed for specific distances and conditions, was distributed between multiple carrying points to ensure accessibility under stress. Communication equipment included not only standard military radios, but also the monitoring devices that would allow her to track enemy movements and coordinate with Bravo Company when contact became possible. The batteries were fresh, the frequencies were programmed, and backup systems were ready for deployment. Navigation gear extended beyond standard GPS to include detailed topographical maps, compass systems, and the hand-drawn charts that represented months of independent intelligence gathering.
Emergency beacons were configured but not activated, ready to guide rescue operations if her mission succeeded in creating viable extraction opportunities. Medical supplies were comprehensive, designed to treat both her own potential injuries and those of Marines she might encounter during the operation. Trauma kits, pain management medications, and emergency surgery supplies were compact but thorough, representing advanced training that had never appeared in her official personnel file. The route she had planned began with departure from the base during the shift change at 0200 hours, when security protocols were most predictable and personnel attention was focused on routine procedures. Her knowledge of base security patterns, gained through months of observation, provided a window of opportunity that wouldn't require compromising any guards or creating disturbances. Physical preparation included final equipment checks, hydration optimization, and mental rehearsal of the initial movement phases. Her body was already conditioned for the demands ahead, but the psychological preparation was equally important. She visualized potential challenges, reviewed contingency plans, and accepted the reality that she might not return from this mission. The hardest part was acknowledging that success would likely result in court-martial and imprisonment, while failure would mean death. Either outcome would end her military career and potentially her life, but neither prospect seemed significant compared to the alternative of watching fellow Marines die when she possessed the capability to help them. At 0130 hours, Harley made her final preparations. She loaded her pack with precision, ensuring that every piece of equipment was accessible and secure. Her movements were automatic, guided by training and preparation that had never been officially recognized but was about to be tested under the most extreme conditions possible. The base was quiet during pre-dawn hours, with most personnel asleep and only essential watchstanders maintaining security. Harley moved through familiar corridors with the confidence of someone who belonged, her gear packed in standard military containers that wouldn't attract attention during casual observation. Her exit from the base required bypassing several security checkpoints, but her knowledge of patrol patterns and shift rotations provided opportunities for undetected movement. The skills she had developed during weekend navigation exercises now served a purpose that training manuals had never anticipated. Once beyond the base perimeter, Harley paused to orient herself using both GPS coordinates and terrain features she had memorized from months of study. The route to her first observation position would take approximately 4 hours through mountainous terrain that would challenge every aspect of her physical and mental preparation. As she began moving through the darkness toward terrain that others had deemed impassable, Harley understood that she was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She was abandoning military discipline in favor of a higher loyalty to fellow Marines who would die without her intervention. The weight of her equipment felt familiar and manageable, the result of countless hours of conditioning that had prepared her body for exactly this type of sustained physical demand. Her breathing was controlled, her pace sustainable, and her mind focused on the tactical challenges ahead rather than the personal consequences of her decision. Behind her, the base continued its routine operations, unaware that their most underestimated Marine was attempting the rescue mission that qualified personnel had deemed impossible.
Dawn was still 2 hours away when Harley reached her first firing position, a rocky outcrop that provided concealment while offering clear sight lines to 3 enemy positions. The climb through mountain terrain had tested every aspect of her physical preparation, but her breathing remained controlled and her hands steady as she assembled her rifle in the pre-dawn darkness. The view through her scope confirmed intelligence she had gathered through months of preparation. Enemy forces were positioned exactly where her analysis had predicted, concentrated in defensive positions that would repel conventional rescue attempts but left key areas vulnerable to precision fire from unexpected angles. Her first target was the communications relay she had identified during her analysis of enemy radio traffic. The equipment was positioned on a ridge approximately 600 meters away, guarded by 4 personnel who clearly weren't expecting threats from her direction. The shot would need to be perfect, destroying the communications equipment while eliminating the immediate threat posed by the guards. Harley's breathing slowed as she aligned her rifle with mechanical precision. Wind conditions were minimal, visibility was excellent, and the distance was well within her proven capabilities. The custom ammunition she had hand-loaded for these conditions would deliver exactly the accuracy required for targets at this range. The rifle's report echoed across the mountains as her first shot found its mark, destroying the communications relay in a shower of sparks and debris. The guards' confusion provided time for follow-up shots that eliminated the immediate threat while sending a clear message to enemy forces throughout the area. They were under attack from an unexpected direction. Enemy radio traffic immediately revealed the impact of losing their primary communications hub. Coordination between positions became chaotic as commanders struggled to understand the nature and source of the attack. Their carefully planned assault on Bravo Company was suddenly disrupted by a threat they hadn't anticipated and couldn't immediately locate. Harley moved quickly to her second position, using terrain features and careful route selection to remain undetected while repositioning for attacks on additional targets. Her knowledge of enemy communication protocols allowed her to monitor their increasingly frantic attempts to re-establish coordination and identify the source of precision fire. The second engagement targeted a heavy weapons position that had been preventing any movement by Bravo Company's perimeter guards. The crew-served weapon was positioned in a natural depression that provided protection from conventional attacks but was visible from Harley's elevated position. 3 shots eliminated the weapon crew and destroyed the equipment, opening a potential escape route for the trapped Marines. Communication with Bravo Company became possible once she reached a position that provided line-of-sight radio contact. Her voice, calm and professional despite the extraordinary circumstances, cut through the static that had isolated the trapped unit for hours. Bravo 6, this is Guardian Angel, do you copy? The response was immediate and filled with desperate hope. Guardian Angel, this is Bravo 6, we copy. Who is this? What's your position? Bravo 6, I'm providing overwatch and fire support from the ridgeline. Enemy communications are disrupted and I've eliminated 2 heavy weapons positions. Prepare for coordinated breakout toward grid reference 347891. Guardian Angel, confirm you are authorized for fire support operations in this sector. Harley paused, knowing that her next words would confirm her unauthorized status. Negative, Bravo 6. This is an independent operation, but I have eyes on enemy positions and can provide effective support for your movement. The radio silence that followed lasted several seconds before Bravo 6 responded. Guardian Angel, whatever your authorization status, we're grateful for the support. Our situation was hopeless without intervention. Over the next hour, Harley systematically engaged targets around the enemy perimeter, using precision fire to eliminate key personnel and equipment while avoiding positions where civilian casualties might occur. Her movement between firing positions followed routes she had memorized during months of preparation, allowing her to remain undetected while maintaining effective fires. Enemy forces began to withdraw from advanced positions as casualties mounted and communication remained disrupted. The precision and unexpected direction of attacks created psychological pressure that multiplied the tactical impact of each engagement. Commanders who had been confident in their overwhelming numerical advantage were now questioning their intelligence and tactical assumptions. The breakthrough came when Harley identified and eliminated the enemy field commander, a shot that required all of her technical skill and sent shockwaves through the remaining enemy forces. Without centralized leadership and effective communication, the carefully coordinated siege began to collapse into confused and uncoordinated defensive actions. Bravo 6, this is Guardian Angel. Enemy command structure is compromised and forward positions are withdrawing. Recommend immediate movement toward extraction coordinates. I'll provide overwatch and fire support during your movement." The sight of Bravo Company Marines finally moving after hours of static defense was overwhelming. 250 Marines, many wounded but all alive, began their coordinated movement towards safety, while Harley provided covering fire from positions that enemy forces couldn't effectively engage. Her ammunition was running low, and her body was exhausted from hours of sustained operations, but the mission was succeeding. Enemy forces continued to withdraw rather than risk further casualties from an opponent they couldn't locate or effectively counter. As helicopter extraction became possible, with enemy air defenses disrupted, Harley realized that her impossible mission had achieved its objective. 250 Marines would live because someone had been prepared for the moment when conventional wisdom proved inadequate. The radio crackled with confirmation that would change everything. All stations, this is command. Bravo Company extraction is complete. All personnel accounted for and en route to medical facilities. Guardian Angel, identify yourself for coordination with recovery operations.
The helicopter that arrived to extract Harley from her final firing position carried more than just rescue personnel. As she was lifted from the mountainous terrain where she had spent 8 hours conducting the most successful solo rescue operation in modern military history, she could see additional aircraft approaching from the direction of the base. Word of her unauthorized mission had clearly reached the highest levels of command. Inside the helicopter, Captain Morrison, the extraction team leader, looked at her with a mixture of awe and concern. "Lee, I don't know whether to recommend you for the Medal of Honor or prepare for your court-martial. What you accomplished up there should have been impossible." The flight back to base took 20 minutes, during which Harley used encrypted communications to provide detailed after-action reports to intelligence personnel. Her documentation of enemy positions, communication protocols, and tactical responses would prove invaluable for future operations, but she understood that this information was being gathered as much for legal proceedings as for military intelligence. The landing pad at Forward Operating Base Sentinel was crowded with personnel representing every level of military hierarchy. Colonel Hayes stood at the center of the group, his expression unreadable as he watched the helicopter settle onto the tarmac. Behind him, Harley could see Major Richardson, Dr. Reynolds, and several officers she didn't recognize, but whose rank insignia indicated involvement from regional command. As she stepped from the aircraft, the silence was deafening. 250 Marines owed their lives to her, but her unauthorized actions represented the most serious breach of military discipline that anyone present had ever witnessed. The contradiction between heroism and insubordination created a tension that no military protocol was designed to address. "Specialist Lee," Colonel Hayes said, his voice carrying across the landing pad, "you are to report immediately for debriefing. Your weapon and equipment will be secured pending investigation into your unauthorized departure from this base and engagement in combat operations without proper authorization." The debriefing that followed lasted 6 hours and involved representatives from multiple commands. Every aspect of her mission was dissected, from her route selection and tactical decisions to the intelligence she had gathered and the equipment she had used. The questioning was thorough but not hostile, as if the interrogators were trying to understand how one Marine had accomplished what conventional military wisdom deemed impossible. "Lee?" General Patterson, who had arrived from regional headquarters, finally asked the question that summarized the entire investigation. "How did you know this mission would succeed when every qualified officer assessed it as impossible?" Harley's answer was direct and honest. "Sir, I spent months preparing for exactly this type of scenario. I studied terrain that others considered irrelevant, developed skills that weren't part of my assigned duties, and acquired knowledge that extended beyond standard training. When the crisis arose, I was ready." "But you had no authorization for this preparation," Major Richardson interjected. "Your supervisors had specifically noted concerns about your tendency toward excessive preparation and inappropriate focus on duties outside your assigned role." "Sir, the Marines of Bravo Company are alive because of that preparation.
If following standard procedures meant watching fellow Marines die when I had the capability to help them, then I chose to prioritize their lives over military protocol. The room fell silent as the implications of her statement settled over the assembled officers. She had essentially argued that sometimes being a good Marine required ignoring orders from people who couldn't recognize what was possible. General Patterson consulted papers spread across the table before him, including performance evaluations, psychological assessments, and preliminary reports about her rescue mission. Lee, your actions represent both the best and worst aspects of military service. You displayed extraordinary courage, skill, and dedication in saving the lives of fellow Marines, but you also showed complete disregard for military discipline and the chain of command. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward, his expression troubled. General, I maintain that Lee's actions, while successful, demonstrate exactly the kind of psychological patterns we identified as problematic. Her inability to accept limitations and tendency toward unauthorized preparation created the conditions for this breach of discipline. However, General Patterson continued, the results speak for themselves. 250 Marines are alive because someone was prepared for a situation that conventional military planning couldn't address. The question we face is whether to court-martial a hero or commend a criminal. The investigation continued for another week, during which Harley remained in administrative detention while military lawyers, commanders, and Pentagon officials debated her fate. Media attention had made the case impossible to handle quietly, with news organizations calling her everything from a rogue soldier to the greatest hero of her generation. The Marines of Bravo Company had submitted a formal petition requesting clemency, stating that their lives had been saved by her actions and that any punishment would be unjust. Veterans organizations, military families, and civilian supporters had launched campaigns demanding recognition rather than punishment for her unauthorized rescue mission. Colonel Hayes, whose initial reaction had been anger at her insubordination, found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending actions he couldn't officially endorse. Lee's actions were unacceptable, he told the investigation board, but her results were extraordinary. We need to find a way to acknowledge her achievement while maintaining military discipline. The final decision came from levels of command far above anything Harley had previously encountered. Secretary of Defense authorization was required for the unprecedented resolution that would determine not only her fate, but the military's approach to initiative and independent action in crisis situations. The announcement, when it finally came, would reshape how the military viewed both individual capability and institutional limitations. Harley's case had forced a reckoning with assumptions about who could accomplish what, when rules should be followed, and how exceptional circumstances demanded exceptional responses.
The ceremony took place 6 weeks later in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, witnessed by military leadership, government officials, and families of the Marines whose lives Harley had saved. She stood at attention in dress uniform, her chest bearing ribbons that represented not only her recent actions, but a complete reevaluation of her military service and capabilities. Secretary of Defense Hamilton approached the podium with documents that represented months of deliberation at the highest levels of government. Today, we recognize actions that challenged our assumptions about military doctrine, individual capability, and the relationship between following orders and serving the greater good. The Medal of Honor citation read like something from military fiction rather than contemporary reality. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty while serving as a sniper with Forward Operating Base Sentinel, when 250 Marines were trapped behind enemy lines with no conventional rescue possible, Specialist Lee conducted an unauthorized solo mission that resulted in the complete evacuation of all personnel. But the ceremony represented more than individual recognition. Hamilton continued, Specialist Lee's actions have prompted a comprehensive review of how we identify, develop, and utilize exceptional capabilities within our military. Her case demonstrates that institutional bias can blind us to potential that doesn't fit conventional expectations. The promotion orders that followed were unprecedented. Harley was immediately advanced to Staff Sergeant and assigned to lead a new Special Operations Unit designed to handle scenarios that conventional military doctrine couldn't address. Her unit would be composed of personnel who, like her, possessed exceptional capabilities that had been overlooked or undervalued by traditional assessment methods. The Harley Lee Protocol, as it became known, established new procedures for identifying and developing Marines whose capabilities extended beyond their assigned roles. Psychological evaluations were revised to distinguish between problematic behavior and exceptional preparation for military excellence. Training programs were expanded to encourage initiative and independent thinking rather than just compliance with existing procedures. Major Richardson, whose dismissal of her capabilities had nearly cost 250 lives, found himself reassigned to administrative duties, pending review of his assessment methods. Dr. Reynolds was required to undergo additional training in recognizing the difference between psychological problems and exceptional dedication to military excellence. The Marines of Bravo Company attended the ceremony en masse, many traveling significant distances to honor the person who had saved their lives. Their presence served as a reminder that military regulations and protocols existed to serve a larger purpose, protecting those who served their country with honor and dedication. Captain Morrison, who had extracted her from the mountains, now served as her executive officer in the new Special Operations Unit. "Ma'am," he said after the ceremony, "I've served with a lot of exceptional Marines, but what you accomplished changed how I think about what's possible when someone refuses to accept limitations." The unit's first mission briefing took place in facilities specifically designed for operations that conventional military planning couldn't address. Maps covered the walls, but these weren't standard military charts. They included detailed terrain analysis, cultural intelligence, and tactical possibilities that extended far beyond traditional military thinking. "Our mission," Harley told her assembled team of formerly overlooked Marines, "is to be ready for the impossible. When conventional solutions fail and lives hang in the balance, we'll be the ones who step forward because we've prepared for situations others can't imagine." The transformation was complete. The logistics specialist who had been deemed too emotional for combat operations now led a unit specifically tasked with accomplishing what others considered impossible. Her tendency toward excessive preparation had become the foundation for a new approach to special operations. 3 months later, when another crisis arose that conventional forces couldn't handle, Harley's team was ready. The skills they had developed independently, the knowledge they had acquired outside official channels, and the dedication they had shown despite institutional dismissal were exactly what the situation required. As she reviewed mission parameters for their first official operation, Harley reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Being told she was too small, too emotional, too invested in outcomes nearly ended her military career. Instead, those same qualities had saved 250 lives and created new possibilities for how the military identified and developed exceptional capability. The radio crackled with mission authorization from the highest levels of command. "Phoenix Team, you are cleared for operation. Your mission parameters are beyond conventional capability. Show them what impossible looks like when someone's prepared for it." Harley smiled as she keyed her radio. "Copy that command. Phoenix Team moving to prove that limitations exist only until someone's ready to exceed them." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.